This is an action anime with magic and fantasy and a crazy romance, and I highly recommend you watch it. This anime follows the life of a man called Tell. He's fed up with the demons that plague his homeland, Sistine Island, and he's also fed up with the cruel king who rules the region. He then decides to leave his island in order to strengthen himself, and so he makes his way towards the main continent. With a lot of effort, he masters the chaos and manages to create a coat of arms. This crest grants him supernatural power and also gives him the title of a nobleman. However, even with the coat of arms, Tell is still just a commoner with no territory or ally, so he starts wandering the continent in search of enough strength to one day return and save his homeland from chaos. One day, his fate changes completely when he sees a girl being attacked by a group of soldiers. A just and courageous man, Tell does not tolerate injustice and rushes to help. He confronts the soldiers, displaying his coat of arms in an attempt to intimidate them. However, the leader of the soldiers is not intimidated, as Tell was just a nobleman with no great reputation, and orders his men to attack him. Tell uses his coat of arms to enchant his sword and armor, and then comes face to face with the soldier. He fights bravely even when outnumbered, managing to disarm and defeat his opponents one by one. Impressed by his courage, the girl he protected introduces herself as Saluka, an extremely talented maid, and Saluka explains that she didn't need any help since her bodyguard, Irvin, is a superhuman capable of using the power of chaos. Curious, she asks Tell how he got his coat of arms. He explains that he created the coat of arms on his own to save his homeland. Saluka is surprised by his potential, but also realizes that he doesn't know much about the world, so she decides to help him become stronger. She then summons a two-headed demon dog and orders Tell to defeat it so that it can absorb the chaos and strengthen her coat of arms. Although frightened, Tell faces the creature. The fight turns out to be brutal, with Tell being thrown several times, but at the last moment he finds a loophole and defeats the demon. With his hand still shaking, he absorbs the chaos released by the creature, and so his crest evolves. Saluka analyzes his coat of arms and informs him that he now has the power equivalent to that of a knight, and that he is able to sign a contract with a maid. Without giving him a chance to refuse, Saluka swears her loyalty to Tell as his maid, and despite being confused, Tell accepts the situation, especially since having a powerful and beautiful sorceress by your side seems like a great deal. Soon, Saluka and Tell decide to confront a local nobleman who has sent soldiers after her. When they reach the nobleman's fortress, Saluka demands that he hand over his lands and coat of arms to Tell. The nobleman laughs, thinking that 3 people, since Irvin was with them, wouldn't be much of a threat. However, Saluka warns him that they are more than enough to defeat him. The nobleman's court wizard, recognizing Saluka as a genius of magic, quickly decides to change sides, accusing the nobleman of breaking the treaty that forbids attacks on mages without a contract. He declares that the nobleman will lose his title as soon as the Magicians Association hears about it, and demands that he hand over everything to Tell. Furious, the nobleman attacks Tell, but is easily repelled. Before he can react again, Irvin appears behind him with a knife at his throat. The terrified nobleman gives in, handing over his coat of arms and his lands to Tell, who absorbs the chaos of the coat of arms under Saluka's guidance. Tell feels sorry for the defeated nobleman, but Saluka reminds him that he is now the owner of this territory. Worried about the reaction of the other noble, Tell receives the support of the court magician, who offers to help negotiate with the neighbors. Saluka then explains the political situation on the continent. Basically, there are 2 factions, the Alliance and the Union, which have been at war for a long time. But to end the conflict, their leaders decided to marry their children and unite their coats of arms, creating the powerful Emperor's coat of arms, which could end the chaos. However, on the day of the wedding, chaos broke out at the altar and gave rise to the Demon Lord. The Demon Lord killed the leaders of both factions in an instant, and the wedding was broken up, which ended up rekindling the war between the group. A few months later, Saluka, accompanied by Irvin, was on her way to a nobleman to sign a contract when she met Tell, and now she wants him to join the Union and begin his journey to conquer the continent. Although Tell doesn't fully understand Saluka's plans, he decides to accept, as she assures him that everything will be fine, as she will be by his side. And then, realizing that Tell doesn't have the profile of a ruler, Saluka takes responsibility for the administrative duty, while he must focus solely on becoming stronger. She learns that all the neighboring lords are keeping an eye on her territory, believing that it won't be difficult to overthrow a new lord. So Saluka decides to let Irvin patrol the border, while she summons a cat demon to help her deliver a message to her friend. Soon afterwards, Tell visits her to ask what but her real purpose is in trying to help him. Saluka replies that she's tired of nobles who only think about power and let the people suffer because of their greed. She claims to be a great fan of the legendary lion hero, who is said to have restored order to a world dominated by chaos. Saluka believes that Tell has the same characteristics and ideals as the legendary hero, which is why she has decided to serve him. Saluka also says that she just wants a chance to prove her abilities, without arrogant nobles interfering with every step she tries to take. A few days later, an ambitious nobleman marches towards Tell's castle with his army, but Saluka tells him that he doesn't have to worry, because her friend is already here. They then go to meet Ashella, who was his student at the Academy of Magic but was rejected in the tests, and now works as a mercenary with superhuman strength. Ashella is very happy to see her friend again, but when she discovers that Tell, the lord she has chosen to follow, has nothing but high ideals, she feels sorry for her friend. Even so, Ashella decides to help them. When the battle begins, Saluka, Ashella, and Irvin are on the front line, while Tell watches from the gate. Everyone moves quickly to face the enemy soldiers, and Saluka uses her magic to erect rock walls and traps several soldiers, while summoning lightning to defeat. Suddenly, a wizard from the enemy army tries to attack her from behind. Saluka realizes the attack at the last moment and manages to avoid it. She discovers that the mage is one of her academy veterans, and he was planning to capture her to end the battle quickly, but the determined Saluka takes on the mage in direct combat. Both are quickly exhausted, and Tell rushes to Saluka's aid, declaring that the battle is his. He confronts the wizard and manages to wound him, but the enemy doesn't give up and tries to attack with all the strength he has left. Meanwhile, Ashella is destroying her enemies with her incredible strength, but the leader of the enemy army is trying to keep her busy to buy time. She realizes her trick and goes straight for the leader, and instead of killing him immediately, she ambushes him and even kisses him before trying to suffocate him. The leader, desperate, orders his soldiers to attack Ashella, even if they have to injure him in the process. She fends off the attacks, and the leader ends up fleeing. Despite this, Ashella seems to have taken a liking to him and shouts for him to meet her after the battle. Not far from there, Irving is facing mercenaries hired by the enemy. He uses his assassin skills to defeat them quickly, but the leader of the mercenaries activates a special ability that turns his skin into steel. Irving doesn't manage to hurt him, but spotting an opportunity, he manages to stab his opponent in the eye and defeat him. Finally, the enemy nobleman decides to confront Tell, but is surprised when Tell appears carrying the captured enemy magician. The nobleman realizes he is lost, and laughing like a madman, he finally surrenders. He offers to become Tell's subordinate, recognizing his strength. Tell accepts his surrender and absorbs his coat of arms, while granting him a subordinate's coat of arms. Soon after, a priestess from the church, Priscilla, visits Tell. As the relationship between the church and the magicians is very complicated, Asaluka refuses to open the door to her, but Tell, believing in the good intentions of the priest, decides to take her in. Priscilla presents herself as a priestess who wants to support Tell's fight against chaos. Meanwhile, the expansion of Tell's territory is progressing thanks to the help of Lassic, the nobleman who has become his subordinate. Asaluka believes it's time for Tell to adopt a surname, and she suggests Cornero, in honor of a hero betrayed by the family of the nobles who ruled Tell's homeland. He likes the idea and adopts the silly name. Soon, Asaluka receives news of a chaos disaster in a nearby town. Tell and his allies rush to help, and when they arrive, they face a fire demon that is ravaging the area. Tell advances recklessly, but realizes that the demon is immune to physical attacks. Asaluka uses a powerful water spell to defeat it, but the demon explodes before it dies, causing great destruction. Tell protects Asaluka from the explosion, but ends up seriously injured. The next day, Asaluka thanks Tell for protecting her. He, in turn, expresses his gratitude for everything she has done. Soon after, the king of the region declares war on Tell, fearing his growing strength. Asaluka suggests that he gather the independent nobles to face the king together, but on the day of the battle, none of the nobles answer the call, leaving only their allies to fight alongside him. At night, the people Tell recently saved from the fire demon show up to help, and declare that they are willing to fight and even die for their lord. Tell is unsure whether or not to allow them to fight, but Asaluka reminds him that they must respect the will of his people. Tell accepts her words and uses his coat coat of arms to create a holographic flag in the sky, encouraging everyone to fight alongside him. The flag falls on his allies, marking them with the symbol of Tel's coat of arms, indicating that they now have the protection and blessing of their lord. The next day, the war begins. Tel's army is still greatly outnumbered by the king's forces, but he leads the battle with great courage. All of Tel's allies use their skills to the full, managing to put pressure on the enemy army. The king, seeing that he is losing ground, decides to send his reserve forces to the front line. Suddenly, however, the independent lords appear to reinforce Tel's army. With the reinforcements, they manage to surround the king and attack him from all sides, forcing him to flee. Asaluka warns Tel of the king's retreat, and he orders his troops to finish off the remaining soldiers. And so the battle is won. Afterwards, Asaluka goes to Lady Marine, who in this case is the leader of the alliance, she being the fiancée of the tragic marriage that started it all, and her objective is to discuss the inclusion of Tel in the alliance. Marine, who has already heard about Tel's dominance in the south, asks for some time to think about, as she believes that having him as an ally could be advantageous. But the master, the court magician and Asaluka's adoptive father, advises her against this idea, claiming that you can't trust someone who changes sides so easily. Lady Marine even says that she might have to fight Tel, and asks the master if he's willing to let Asaluka die in battle. He replies without hesitation that he has no problem with that. Later, he sends a message to Asaluka, saying that her request to be included in the alliance has been denied, and that she must ask Tel to renounce his title and flee. Asaluka is furious, but before she leaves, she warns the master and the marine that they will meet on the battlefield. With no options, Asaluka turns to Count Viller Constance, a powerful Union nobleman who is also Marine's cousin, but he refuses to receive her. The reason? He was the nobleman she should have made the contract with in the first place, but Asaluka chose to follow Tel. He sends word that he sees no merit in allying himself with Tel. Without support, Asaluka returns to inform Tel and the others that the Marine and the dethroned king will soon attack them with an army 5 times their size. Even so, Tel declares that even if they lose, they will have a memorable fight. His allies are ready to follow him to the end. Soon, the alliance army arrives at the castle, and the soldiers led by Iskla failed to cause significant damage to their enemies. The knights of the alliance use powerful crossbows to tear down the castle wall. Iskla faces her enemies in hand-to-hand combat, killing several of them while dodging arrows, but in the middle of the confrontation, she is hit by an arrow at a critical point. Asaluka rushes to Iskla's side, believing that she is going to die. However, Priscilla, the priestess, appears and uses her powers to save Iskla's life. While Priscilla tends to her friend's wounds, Asaluka goes out to help the soldiers. Meanwhile, Tel is already in control of the situation, and when the Knights of the Alliance finally break down the main gate and invade the castle, Tel closes the secondary gates and orders a surprise attack from all sides. Surrounded, the Knights of the Alliance retreat, but Tel receives news of the death of one of his trusted allies. He learns that Tel Lassic has been defeated and is retreating. But this was part of Lassic's plan, who has lured the former king and his soldiers to a narrow mountain path, where he begins to eliminate them one by one. The king despairs at the sight of his soldiers being killed and tries to organize a retreat, but Irvin and the other mercenaries control the battlefield, preventing his escape. With no way out, the king decides to face Lassic in a duel. They engage in an epic sword fight, where the king manages to pressure Lassic, but he counters and breaks one of the king's swords. And after the final blow, we see that Lassic has emerged victorious, killing the former king. Lassic returns to the castle with the prisoners and is congratulated by Tel, who puts him in charge of the captured troop. But Tel admits that although they may win some battles, it's impossible to win the current war. So his new strategy is to negotiate with the alliance so that they withdraw. Saluka then details the plan to everyone. The only way to convince the alliance is for Tel to give up his title and leave the land. Lassic, who killed the former king, would become the new leader of the southern region, and Lassic doesn't like the idea of Tel having to abandon everything. But Tel says that with his reputation and Saluka by his side, he can return at any time. However, when he tries to negotiate an end to the war, the master, Saluka's father, rejects the proposal. proposal, saying that the alliance will only back down if they have Tell's head. Saluka then returns to the castle and warns everyone of the conditions imposed. The allies refuse to allow Tell's sacrifice, vowing to fight together until the end. Meanwhile, Lady Marini and the knights are told that Tell has offered some conditions for a peaceful surrender, but they refuse. The knights think this was the right decision, as they want to defeat Tell and his army to save their reputation. But Lady Marini believes that Count Viller could attack them from the rear if they put too many of his soldiers on the front line. However, the knights are confident that he won't attack them, since he refused to help Saluka before. Lady Marini then asks her knights to do as they please, and the next day, most of her forces attack Tell's castle, while she stays behind with only 100 guards. And that was the moment Count Viller had been waiting for. He and his soldiers attack Lady Marini when she is least protected. The Alliance Knights immediately retreat to protect their lady, and Saluka is so happy that they are safe that she ends up throwing herself into Tell's arm. Everyone now tastes victory and later discovers that Achella survived thanks to Priscilla's healing. Later, Tell holds a meeting to tell everyone that the Alliance Knights have withdrawn for good after suffering many casualties, and that they can now relax. One of the allies tells him that they should thank Count Viller for this, but also warns them that he is not their ally under any circumstances, and that they may have to fight him next. Speaking of the devil, Count Viller enters the meeting along with his court magician. He greets Tell, who thanks him for helping him, and Count Viller tells him not to mind, as he wanted revenge on Lady Marini a long time ago. Saluka also apologizes for having broken her contract with him before, but he replies that she must return to his side now, and that he will forget everything that happened in the past. Count Viller tells Tell to become the king of the south, and offers to be his ally. Everyone is rooting for Tell, but he refuses to accept Count Viller's offer because it would mean letting Saluka go. He offers to give up all his title and coat of arms and become her knight, so that he can still have his girl by his side. Count Viller thinks he's just an idiot, but his wizard tells him to accept him as a subordinate, as it would be beneficial for him. Count Viller accepts Tell as his knight, and tells him and Saluka to move into his castle soon. He leaves, and Tell hands over his territory and army to Lassic, who promises to be loyal to him and help him whenever he needs it. Priscilla also wants to follow Tell, but he tells her to ask Count Viller about it, as he's the boss now. While everyone is talking about the future, Saluka ends up realizing that she is falling in love with Tell. Soon, they arrive at Count Viller's castle, where he assigns Tell to be his guard, while Saluka goes to meet the magicians who work for him. After they have finished their introductions, a red-haired magician tells Saluka that she will be attending a party to welcome a prince from a foreign nation that evening. Tell also joins the party to welcome Prince Mirza, who gets excited whenever he hears anyone talk about ambition. He had heard that Tell had given up his post and his lands for just a single mage, and openly disrespected him. But when he learned that Lassic, who currently rules the southern region, is just filling in as king in Tell's absence, his opinion changed a little. Later, Tell cleans the library, while Saluka reads him the story of witches who have the power to summon spirits and demons. Saluka explains that witches are different from wizards, and that those who are linked to the world of demons are called black witches, while their opposites are called white witches. Along with this, she tells Tell about superhumans who turn into immortal vampires and werewolves who regenerate infinitely, and that many have fought against the demon lord in the past. And on hearing about so many powerful people, Tell complains about the lack of powerful people in his homeland, and Saluka comforts him, saying that surely one day he will save his homeland. Now they are summoned by Count Viller, who introduces them to Zelma, the elder of the White Witches. Count Viller orders Tell and Saluka to follow her into the forest of eternal darkness and meet the werewolves who have suddenly left their home. Zelma explains that the forest is vampire territory, and there seems to be something going on between them and the werewolf. They immediately set off into the forest and meet a group of hostile werewolves who refuse to tell them what has happened. Suddenly, a talking bat arrives on the scene and tells the werewolves that Tell is a guest of the vampire king and asks them to let him pass. The werewolves are furious with with the Vampire King and demand that their queen and her daughters be returned to them, but the bat ignores them and flies away. Tell follows him and promises the werewolves that he will do his best to help them in any way he can. They soon arrive at the Vampire King's castle, where he reveals that a black witch called Yana has taken the werewolves' queen. He has no plans to interfere in their battle and declares that he is no longer an ally of the werewolves or the nobles. The Vampire King declares that all the nobles who bear the coat of arms are his enemies now, and that he wants to drench the world with the chaos he once fought. He claims that if the nobles unite and create the Emperor's seal, they could end up banishing chaos forever, and so the superhumans would lose their powers, and the Vampire King would consequently become a normal human, and he doesn't want that. Saluka thinks he was responsible for releasing the Demon Lord during the wedding tragedy, but his words don't please the vampire. Tell prepares to fight him, but the vampire isn't interested and leaves, but not before telling them the location of the werewolf queen. Tell and Saluka rush to the area where the werewolf queen is fighting the black witch Yana to protect her daughters. Yana wants to kill the queen and use her as a sacrifice to summon the Demon Lord, and she's about to do it, but Tell arrives on the scene before she can finish off the queen, which makes Yana furious because the Vampire King has abandoned her, leaving her alone to fight them. Even so, she believes that they are no match for her and sends her gargoyles to confront them. Saluka uses lightning magic, but it's not enough to stop the gargoyles from approaching. Tell defeats the one that was attacking him and immediately rushes to Saluka's rescue. Meanwhile, Yana prepares her final attack and casts an extremely powerful spell in Tell's direction. Saluka tries to block the attack with her magic barrier, but the spell passes through the barrier and Tell is barely able to protect himself. He uses the power of his crest to enchant his sword and deflects the attack, causing it to hit the ceiling. The werewolf queen seizes this opportunity and attacks Yana after transforming, but her real goal is to free her captive daughter. Yana strikes back with vines and summons more gargoyles to fight alongside her, but the werewolf queen quickly eliminates the creatures before confronting her. When Yana tries to escape using her broom, the werewolf queen manages to land a deep blow on her legs. However, the witch still manages to escape through the hole in the ceiling. Even though Saluka and the queen's daughters try to stop her, the daughters immediately rush to their mother's side, but she is seriously injured and cannot survive. Before she dies, the queen asks Tell to protect her daughters and bring them out safely. Fulfilling his promise, Tell returns with his daughters and the queen's body to the werewolf clan. The werewolves hold a funeral for their queen, whose body is transformed into chaos energy, and the energy is shared among the members of the clan. The new leader of the werewolves thanks Tell for his help and pledges his loyalty to him. With this, Tell has taken control of the castle, which previously belonged to the Vampire King, and talks to Saluka about how working with the forest dwellers can benefit their cause. However, after the battle against Yana, Tell realizes that he needs to become stronger. He declares that he will do anything to grow as a warrior and leader, and Saluka promises that she will grow with him. Now, accompanied by Irvin and the werewolf twins who have decided to become Tell's employees, they are preparing for new challenges. Meanwhile, Viller Constance receives an invitation to the annual meeting of the Union nobles, and even though he doesn't want to go, he has no choice. His court magician, Margaret, tries to encourage him, saying that he will be praised for his recent victory. However, Viller is skeptical, as he knows that Mirza's ex-fiancée could cause problems. Changing the subject, Viller comments on Margaret's birthday, as she is about to turn 25. She is hurt by the conversation and leaves the room. Saluka and the other wizards realize the situation and discover that Viller has a habit of separating from his wizards when they turn 25. All this so that they can get on with their own lives. Margaret doesn't want to leave Viller because she loves him, and Saluka decides to talk to him on her behalf. But Viller explains that he believes it's best for Margaret to have the freedom to build a family and live her own life. He orders Saluka to organize a birthday party for Margaret, and at the same time begins planning his participation in the Union's annual meeting. He decides to take Saluka, Tell, and Lassig with him, and during Margaret's birthday party, she seems happy for a moment as she dances passionately with Viller, but becomes melancholy as she remembers that she will soon be saying goodbye to him. Meanwhile, Tell and Saluka talk about how much they've achieved together, and inspired by the atmosphere of the party, Tell asks Saluka to dance, even though she doesn't know how, and she ends up having to teach him right there. Later, Mirza approaches Tell and calls him a great clown. Tell responds with humility, saying that he considers it a compliment to be able to entertain the prince. Mirza doesn't like the answer and challenges Tell to a mock duel. In the duel, Mirza attacks with intensity, while Tell defends himself skillfully. Annoyed by Tell's defensive attitude, Mirza accuses him of being weak and claims that nobles like him are to blame for the age of chaos. Tell doesn't seem to mind these words, and this makes Mirza furious. Afterwards, Mirza leaves, but not before warning him that his lack of ambition could cost the lives of his allies in the future. Afterwards, Saluka comforts Tell, telling him that he must remain true to his convictions, and that she will always be by his side. Shortly afterwards, the time finally comes to leave for the Union, and Viller decides to conquer the territories between him and the meeting place as they travel. When they reach a neighboring kingdom, some nobles defect to his side, while others remain loyal to the king. Lask leads the army, and at Saluka's request, allows Tell to deal with an independent and prominent noble. Mirza sets out alone to defeat the king's right-hand man. Mirza invades the enemy nobleman's castle and demands that he hand over his coat of arms and land. He gives everyone 3 days to leave, promising to kill anyone who disobeys. The nobleman laughs and orders his men to attack, but Mirza easily disarms and kills the leader before he can beg for his life. Soon after, he absorbs the energy of his enemies into his crest and spares one survivor, ordering him to hand over the land to Lask in silence. Upon returning to camp, Mirza reflects on how Tell will deal with the noble he has been assigned. On the other hand, Tell entered the territory of the nobleman he was supposed to fight, all after a long conversation with Saluka about what would be the best move. Well, everyone in town heard that he had defeated the Knights of the Alliance, and followed him as he went to meet the noble Lavin. Lavin tells him that he has no plans to surrender to the Union forces, and asks him to leave, but Tell explains that even if he returns empty-handed, Lask and his army will soon invade the city and take it by force. He asks Lavin to fight with him outside the castle so that his people don't get caught in the crossfire. And being a wise and competent ruler, Lavin accepts the proposal because he knows that there is no way to prevent his territory from falling into the hands of the Union. The people of Lavin don't want him to fight alone, and they promise to fight by his side and follow him wherever he goes. Tell is moved by this devotion and says that Lavin should value his people more than loyalty to the Alliance. After reflection, Lavin decides to change sides and join the Union, all so that he can continue to lead his people. He also reveals that he admires Tell, saying that he is a man of great ideals and that all nobles should be more like him. Lavin swears loyalty to Tell, promising to support him when he regains his title and land. The city raises Union flags alongside its own, and Saluka comments that Tell has exceeded her expectations by getting Lavin to surrender so quickly. Meanwhile, on the main battlefield, Lask defeats the king of the country, and the news reaches Viller. He celebrates the fact that they won without too many casualties, thanks to the efforts of Tell and Mirza, who faced their crucial battles alone. Soon after, they arrive at the annual meeting of the Union nobles, where Tell feels out of place. The nobles are divided into factions. Some hail Viller as a hero for his territorial conquests, while others comment that his actions have damaged the peace of the continent. Just then, Alexei, the leader of the Union and fiancé of the tragic marriage, makes his entrance. He has a majestic presence, which easily wins people's attention, especially that of women. Alex greets Count Viller and thanks Saluka for saving him during the wedding tragedy. He then turns his attention to Tell, claiming to be a big fan of his achievement. Later, Viller takes Tell to meet Rossine, the ruler of Tell's hometown, who warns him not to return to the island if he values his life. Later, when Tell is resting in his room, Alex shows up to talk to him in private. Tell is confused by the Union leader's visit, but Alex says he admires him. He says he heard how Tell came off the streets and became the ruler of the South, but he gave it all up because of Saluka. He cries as he says that he also loves Marine deeply and that he would be willing to give up everything for her, but she is determined to continue on her path. Alex says he wants the nobles of the continent to unite to forge the Emperor's coat of arms, and that together they should banish all chaos from the world. Tell is moved and and promises to help Alex make this dream come true, promising to help reunite with Marine as well. Before leaving, Alex tells Tel to find happiness with Saluka, and just as he is about to board his carriage, Erwin notices an attack approaching and warns everyone. Saluka erects a magical barrier to block the enemy arrows before the attackers advance. The werewolf sisters transform and quickly eliminate the enemies, while Tel and the remaining guards also fight. During the battle, Tel realizes that the enemy attackers are not after Alex, but him, and when Saluka is almost stabbed, her cat demon hiding in the shadows saves her. After eliminating all the attackers, Erwin reports that he faced an assassin while taking care of the shooters and was wounded in the process. And after that, Alex leaves, still feeling guilty about the assassination attempt, but Tel knows he was the real target, and Saluka comments that with Alex involved, Rossini's days are numbered. She believes that he will, at the very least, be expelled from the Union, and soon they will have the chance to act. The next day, Tel informs Viller about the assassination attempt, and also about the fact that Alex still loves Lady Marini. Viller is happy to hear this, and tells the story of how Alex and Marini fell in love. They met at the gym, when Alexis was just admiring some rocks on the road, and as soon as he saw Marine, he fell deeply in love. He sent her hundreds of love letters and created a garden full of roses to attract her attention, until she finally started to notice him. To thank him, Marine went to a masked neighborhood where a man tried to approach her, and when she confronted him, he got violent, and Alexis was the one who showed up to protect her, but he ended up being knocked out with just one juice. Even so, Marine was touched by his gesture and took him to her room, where they discovered that they belonged to enemy families. Despite this, they kissed and decided they would get married one day. Viller concludes the story, saying that he supported their marriage at the time. Soon after, during the conference of nobles, Rossini is exiled from the meeting. Then one of the nobles blames Viller for provoking fights with the Marine, reducing the chances of a peaceful union on the continent. Tel explains that it was his fault for starting a fight, and that Viller only came to help him. The nobles are unable to debate against the Viller for long, and the decision to go to war against the alliance is approved. After that, Alexis addresses the noble and claims that he is their leader only because that was his father's position. He believes that he is no longer suitable for this role and wants a new leader to be chosen immediately. He nominates Viller to be the next leader because of his military power, but he refuses the promotion because he doesn't want to fight his cousin, Marine, to the death. Taking advantage of this, Marx runs for the position of next leader, and now there's no one to oppose him, and the first thing he does is stop all the wars and resume the peace treaties with the alliance. Most people are happy with this decision, but not Alexis, because he knows that Marx wants to marry Marine to ensure peace. When the message reaches Marine, she refuses to accept the peace treaty, and tells her court magician, Albust, to prepare for war. She is upset by this decision because she still loves Alexis and thinks that there is now no way to save their love. Soon after this, a nobleman arrives at Villers, saying that the Marine army has arrived in neighboring territory and that they could attack him at any moment. Mirza and Saluka tell him that he shouldn't follow the Union's policy of peace and to counterattack immediately, but Viller refuses. He is not satisfied with Saluka's persistence and dismisses her and Tel before sending a nobleman away. As Saluka and Tel travel back to his territory in the dark forest, she is still upset that Viller has ignored her advice, even though he knows they have no way of avoiding war. So to get her out of her gloomy mood, Tel invites her for a walk through the territory, but all they find is the cold, critical gaze of the forest people. They continue traveling through the dark forest, while fighting monsters and exploring unknown areas. Soon, it starts to rain, and they take shelter in a hollow tree, where Tel shares a blanket with Saluka to keep warm. They talk about how happy they are to be with each other, and Tel ends up telling Saluka that he is worried about her becoming Viller's sorceress permanently, but she assures him that she will never leave his side. Tel hugs her, telling her how important she is to him, and Saluka can't stand it any longer and confesses her feelings for him. and Tell admits that he loves her too, after which they start kissing. On the other hand, the war between Marini and Villar's neighbor has begun, and Mirza has come to help of his own free will. He dodges the attacks of the enemy beasts and eliminates an entire squad by himself. Marini is surprised to see someone of his caliber, and later, at the meeting of her knights, she agrees to violate the war treaties by using an artificial poison of chaos to take the enemy fortress. Her knights are surprised by her decision, but she says that they cannot afford to lose this war. She sends Albest to create the chaos poison at sea, while telling her servants to send a message to Mirza. Albest creates the poison of chaos and sends it towards the enemy convent fortress. The poison envelops the fortress and renders all the soldiers unable to fight. Marini and her knights soon invade the area and kill all the soldiers, as well as their leader. Before setting fire to the fortress, Mirza was watching the one-sided massacre from a distance and found it all very amusing. Suddenly, Marini's servants approach him and invite him to meet them. He accepts the invitation, but tells his servants to take Marini to him. Mirza has decided to leave the village because he has no ambition to unite the continent into one, and now he wants to support Marini. She soon arrives to meet him and asks him to support the alliance for the unification of the continent. Mirza asks her about her relationship with Alexis, and she reveals that she knows Marini is lying when she says she's over that relationship. Then he says that he will join the alliance only on one condition, that she sleeps with him that night. Marini accepts the condition, saying that it will only be for one night, and that she will never belong to him, no matter what. Mirza has no problem with this, and Marini allows him to dominate her for the sake of his ambition. Soon afterwards, Marini is ready to go to the Villar's territory, and Albest tells her that Mirza has killed his father, become king of his country, and has officially decided to ally himself with the alliance. The Villar is also preparing to face her, and summons all his allies to join forces with him. His mages spot the Mirza and its fleet of warships approaching, but the Villar senses that something strange is happening, and orders them to prepare their weapons while he goes to the dock. At the docks, he meets Margaret, who informs him that Mirza has defected to Marini's side, and has even killed his father since he was in their way. The Villar is incredulous and realizes that winning this battle won't be so easy now. He commands his ships to attack Mirza's fleet, which quickly counterattacks and jumps on the Villar's ships, killing his soldiers in no time. The captain orders his men to break the steering wheel and pour oil all over the ship. After that, they abandon ship, and the captain sets it on fire to take Mirza with him. This is totally futile, and Mirza kills the captain after a fight and flees the burning ship. Meanwhile, the Villar's magicians are using a giant lens to set Mirza's ships on fire, one by one. On leaving the sea, the Mirza decide to withdraw for the time being, as their troops have taken too much oil today. Back at the palace, the Villar realizes that if he just defeats the Mirza, the alliance forces will lose half their power, and he plans to join the battle himself soon. Margaret is determined to join him too, claiming that Mirza has already killed her entire clan. Soon after, one of the Villar's allies arrives on the scene with a gigantic warship and wreaks havoc on Mirza's fleet. He realizes that it's impossible to win the battle at sea and orders his men to rush to the coast immediately. On the other hand, Marine's forces defeat one of the Villar's strongest allies. Soon, the Mirza and other allies join forces, and the Marine declares that the real battle will now begin. The Viking princess, at his side, leads a giant fleet of warships to the Villar's castle at night, and he realizes that he can't win now. He decides to fight to the end and orders his mages to contact all the nobles under his command and tell them to surrender. He prepares for battle with Margaret's help, and finally admits that he loves her too, and that they can now die together. The gigantic warship faces the marine fleet of 1,000 ships, but despite their efforts, they can't win. But to take out as many enemies as possible, a man blows up the giant ship, but this doesn't do much damage to the enemy fleet. The enemies attack the Villa's castle from all sides, and the Marine leads the attack from the front. They're about to break through the castle gate, and the Villa and Margaret are ready to face them alone. Margaret uses her supreme spell and snakes herself with fire. She crosses the enemy lines, and the Viller cuts down all the enemies in its path. Margaret soon runs out of fuel, but when the Viller arrives to support her, she pushes him to safety, before using all her remaining strength to self-destruct. It turns to ash after the explosion, and the Viller, heartbroken, attacks the enemy soldiers without any concern for their defense. The Marine orders her knights to fire their crossbows at him, but he blocks the combined attack using his coat of arms. She is astonished to see this, and decides to speak to her cousin for the last time. The villager welcomes her with open arms, and the Marine embraces him and asks him to surrender. However, he asks her to follow the path she has chosen for herself. He also wishes that one day she could marry Alex and find true happiness. As a result, he dies. His coat of arms shatters. His soldiers are furious and launch a suicide attack on their enemies. But it's no use, and by morning, Marine has completely conquered the castle. She goes to the throne room, where one of the villa's magicians tells her that she may have conquered the castle, but everyone will still be loyal to the villa. The Marine then gives the villa's coat of arms and territory to Mirza, who will now lead his army to conquer the entire continent. Soon, news of the Villar's death reaches his allies, and Tell is heartbroken to hear it. All of the Villar's allies come together and form a separate group called the Treaty to avenge his death and prevent the alliance from conquering the continent. Everyone believes that Lask should be the next leader, but he replies that he is still Tell's subordinate and appoints him as leader. The nobles don't see Tell as a leader and argue with Lask about his decision. Tell introduces himself and tells everyone that he will prove his worth as a leader in the next battle and asks everyone to accept him. The nobles decide to elect Lask as their leader until Tell can prove that he is better than him. On the other hand, Mirza is trying to conquer the nobles under the villa's command, but they refuse to submit to him and fight with all their might. And while he sits on his throne, one of the Marine mages comes to deliver a message, asking him to recover the territories that the villa has conquered. The magician asks Mirza to beware of his enemy's strength, but he doesn't like anyone telling him to be careful. Mirza soon leads his army against the enemies and overpowers them. The Villar's brother, who is in command of the army, decides to retreat and lures Mirza to follow him to where Lask is waiting with his army. Lask and Mirza are really looking forward to fighting each other and race ahead of their armies. They exchange powerful blows, and soon their armies are in battle too. Lask takes some damage and is pressed immediately, but he also manages to wound Mirza, who realizes that he is the only man strong enough to take him on. Mirza believes he is at a disadvantage at the moment and decides to withdraw from the battlefield. On the other hand, the Marine arrives in Tell's territory, and in a moment of reflection, she quietly regrets having refused to let him join the alliance in the past. She believes that he doesn't have a strong army at the moment, but she still doesn't want to face him, or even Saluka, even though they are declared enemy. The Marine decides to ask the wizard to send a message to Tell, as she wants to speak to him one last time before the battle begins. Tell soon receives the message, and ponders what Marine might want to talk about, considering that a battle between them seems inevitable. Saluka comments that Marine might have a personal interest in Tell, and that their meeting might not just be about politics. Tell understands and agrees to meet Marine, as he also has something to say to her. Saluka also decides that she wants to meet her father one last time, because despite all the problems, he is still her family. Visiting Marine's tent, Saluka hugs her father before they start talking. Marine greets Tell with a handshake and says she's heard a lot about him. Tell responds by mentioning that he's also heard rumors about her, and comments that she seems like a completely different person now. He reveals that he met Alexis once, and that he believes he still loves her deeply. Tell tries to convince her to reconsider, but Marine mentions that Villar also tried to convince her before he died. She explains that she believes she and Alexis have been too naive, and that the only way to end the age of chaos is to conquer the continent through war. Marine declares that she is willing to spill all the blood necessary to do so, and warns that she does not wish to fight Tell, but that she will take back that territory anyway. The meeting ends with Tell reflecting on Marine and telling her that he believes she still loves Alexis and that he wants to bring them back together. Saluka replies that this would require a miracle. Tell, however, shows determination when he says that he will make this miracle happen. Surprised by his words, Saluka is even more shocked when Tell kisses her in front of all his soldiers. Red as a tomato, she complains that this is neither the time nor the place for it. Tell explains that he kissed Saluka in front of all the soldiers to inspire them to fight for their leader's love and cause. The soldiers are thrilled, and Seleuca realizes that the gesture was also a trick to make the Marine remember her love for Alexis. The plan works, and the frustrated Marine receives news that one of the villa's allies has defeated the Viking forces, forcing them to retreat. The situation changes, and Tell decides to return to his homeland to regain control and strengthen his position. Seleuca points out that in order to help Alexis and Marine reunite, Tell needs a position and authority equal to theirs. He accepts the plan and informs Lassik. And although the wizard Lassik considers the mission risky, he supports the idea because he believes that defeating Rossini and conquering Sistina will prove that Tell is fit to lead the noble. Then Tell, Seleuca, and their closest allies arrive in Sistina and discover that Rossini has allowed chaos to spread in order to keep the population oppressed and dispersed. Determined to change this, Tell decides to march straight into Rossini's city, while Seleuca devises a plan to announce his arrival to the whole region. Rossini sends troops to confront him, which ends up working in Tell's favor, as it encourages the oppressed people to believe that there is someone who can stand up to him. In the city, Tell, Seleuca, and Ixla stop at a restaurant, where they meet Iana, who is recognized by Seleuca. Iana's boyfriend, Salvador, is revealed to be Rossini's eldest son. The savior confronts Tell and declares that he will defeat his enemies, using his coat of arms to force the people around him to swear allegiance to him. Tell realizes that the people affected by the crest have lost their minds and decides to back off, avoiding hurting innocent people. Reunited, they discuss the next step, which in this case is to tour the villages to rally the people against Rossini. However, the villagers, accustomed to living under oppression, fear reprisals and refuse to help. The savior, for his part, intensifies the repression, burning down villages that show support for Tell, and when Tell encounters a hostile village, he realizes that Rossini's family rules through fear and despair. Despite this, he remains determined to free Sistina and restore dignity to his people. As Tell takes his friends away, they wonder if there really is no one who will help them in the revolution. Seleuca suggests that they can go to Tell's village, as surely someone will understand them, but their silence already tells them everything they need to know. However, Tell still decides to take everyone to his village to show them what he has experienced. Tell spots his childhood friend, Rebecca, near the border of the village. She runs towards him, but stops at a safe distance. He asks her to gather all the villagers together because he wants to talk to them. While Tell is talking to the villagers about the past, Seleuca finds out from Rebecca that Tell's father built a secret warehouse in the village. This warehouse helped people evade heavy tax. One day, someone snitched on him, and Rossini's soldiers killed him to set an example. The villagers couldn't resist, and Tell held their grudge for a long time, eventually leaving the village. Now, however, he claims to have left all that bitterness behind. Tell asks the villagers if they want to live under Rossini's rule forever, and asks them to rise up against him, but no one answers, and Tell decides to leave. Rebecca stops him, however, and asks him to at least visit his father's grave. He agrees, and tells Seleuca and the others to wait for him. Rebecca continues to talk happily about how Tell has come up through the ranks, and claims that he can really beat Rossini. However, Tell tells her to stop acting, as he knows she's terrible at it. He realizes that Rebecca is working for Rossini, and asks how they threatened her. She replies that she wasn't threatened, but that she snitched on Tell to have a chance of being taken to the city. Rebecca doesn't feel guilty for betraying him, but Tell feels sorry for her, because he understands that it's not easy to stand up to your oppressors. He tries to convince her that if everyone unites against the oppressor, they can win, and when she doesn't accept his words, he asks her to tell all the villagers to flee, because he's sure Rossini will punish them after him. Tell goes alone to his father's grave, aware that his enemies are waiting for him. Meanwhile, Rebecca rushes back to the village, where Seleuca is trying to convince the villagers to join the revolution. Rebecca warns them that Tell already knew it was a trap, but still went into it to protect them. She begs the villagers to help Tell, reminding them that Rossini will not spare them even if they hand over the boy. Meanwhile, Tell arrives at his father's grave, where the savior and his his soldiers are waiting for him. They fire arrows at him, but Irving appears to protect him. It turns out that Saluka has ordered Irving and the werewolf twins to follow Tell. However, the savior doesn't see them as a threat. Suddenly, the villagers arrive to support Tell, who thanks them and then raises his banner and blesses everyone with his powers. The savior also uses his coat of arms to grant power to the soldier. And so the battle begins. The villagers take cover behind makeshift shelters and throw rocks at their enemies. Saluka and Ixla work together in powerful magic combos to defeat various enemies, while Irving takes on Rossini's assassin. Tell fights directly against the savior and manages to break his sword. However, enemy soldiers show up to help the savior, giving him the opportunity to escape. The Tell is surrounded by enemies and has no way out, but Rebecca appears unexpectedly and grabs the savior to stop him. Even though the Tell asks her to let go, she doesn't, and in response, the savior stabs Rebecca with a hidden dagger. Furious, Tell defeats the soldiers around him and sets out to attack the savior, who tries to flee but is killed next to the tomb of Tell's father. With the death of their leader, the enemy soldiers retreat. Tell rushes to Rebecca's side, but she dies in his arms, leaving him devastated. The impact of the battle quickly spreads throughout Sistina, and several revolts begin to break out. Rossini and his sons meet to discuss the situation. They realize that the situation will get worse if they don't act quickly, so Rossini orders his sons to gather 5,000 soldiers to crush the revolution immediately, as he is not willing to lose another son for lack of preparation. Rossini's eldest son accepts the task of suppressing the rebellion and avenging the savior. He leaves the room determined, and Rossini, still consumed with rage, vows to ruin Tell's life for killing his son. Meanwhile, the assassin who worked for the savior is still lurking around, determined to get revenge on Irvin. Yana finds the assassin and discovers his mission. She comments that tracking Irvin down alone will be tricky, since the werewolf twins are always around, and Yana has some ideas. She assures the assassin that she will be able to lure the twins away, allowing him to face Irvin without interference. Yana, moreover, is eager to eliminate the werewolves, after which she also wants to finish off Tell and Saluka, who disgust her deeply. Meanwhile, the number of people under Tell's command is increasing rapidly, and Ixla is training new recruits so that they can fight properly. Tell is heartened to see so many people rising up against Rossini's rule, and shares his plans to build a castle in his village in the future, so that everyone can rule in peace. Saluka reminds him that it's too early to think about that, but she is interrupted when Irvin warns them that Rossini's second son is marching towards them with a huge army. Tell quickly organizes his troops and leads his army to meet their enemy. On the battlefield, Irvin and the werewolf twins spot their respective mortal enemies. They inform Saluka that they need to leave to deal with them immediately, and she wishes them caution before they walk away. Irvin takes on the killer in fierce combat. The enemy is just as skilled and uses poison knives, which puts Irvin at a disadvantage. Even so, he manages to block the attack, while covering his own blade in poison. The fight goes on intensely, as if the two were ninjas, until Irvin lands a decisive stab. The assassin loses his balance, and Irvin delivers the final blow. However, he is also hit by a poison knife and collapses. Meanwhile, the werewolf twins face Yana, who has summoned a powerful demon to fight. The twins attack the demon, but are unable to break through its magical barrier. The demon strikes back, surrounding them with a circle of hellfire. With no other choice, the twins decide to use a combined attack. Turning into wolves, they leap over the barrier, launch themselves into the sky, and attack Yana directly. She dodges the first blow, but is hit in the back by the second, forcing her to retreat. As Yana flees, the demon disappears, and the twins run to find Irvin, only to find him unconscious. They realize that he has been poisoned and fear for his life, but Priscilla, who arrives on the scene at that moment, says that she will not allow him to die there. Then, using the power of her crest, she heals Irvin, saving his life. Back on the battlefield, Theo observes the leader of the enemy forces, who in this case is Rossini's second son, and motivates his soldiers by saying that if they defeat the leader, Rossini's power will begin to crumble. He raises his flag and blesses his allies with his protection, while Rossini Jr. uses the cursed power of his coat of arms to strengthen his troops, and so the battle begins. Theo takes on Rossini Jr. directly, managing to bring down his horse with a strategic attack. Rossini Jr. advances against him, him, but Theo holds his ground. In the duel, Theo gets the better of his enemy, wounding him and knocking him to the ground. Soldiers arrive to help him, but he manages to take them down easily. Rossini Jr. gets up and attacks him, but Theo disarms him and then kills him, ending the fight. Theo's soldiers celebrate their victory, and he asks Saluka to make the surviving enemy soldiers surrender. Just then, Iana descends from the sky towards them, aiming to kill Theo in a suicide attack. She launches her most powerful attack against him, but Saluka reacts quickly and counters with her most powerful spell. The two attacks cancel each other out in the sky, and Iana falls to the ground, being captured in the process. The news of his son's death reaches Rossini, who realizes that he has already lost the battle. He is ready to surrender to Theo, but wants his remaining son, Giselle, to survive at any cost. Giselle says that he will negotiate with Theo and try to prove that he will be useful both to Theo and to the people of Sistina. A while later, Theo finally arrives at the castle with his soldiers, and Giselle goes out to welcome them. Giselle says that he will surrender if the lives of the people who serve him are spared. Theo agrees, but says that he and his father will die, and that all the wealth accumulated by their family and their allies will be confiscated. Giselle tries to convince him to let him live, claiming that he can help govern Sistina, but Theo refuses to let him live for this reason. In the end, he decides to keep him alive to avoid retaliation from those loyal to the Rossini family. Giselle accepts the condition and swears loyalty to Theo, which delights both the people and Saluka. Later, Saluka interrogates Yana to understand her motives. She believes that Yana was the one who summoned the demon lord during the tragedy of the Great Wedding, but she also knows that she is not strong enough to do it alone. Yana refuses to answer, and instead attacks Saluka. Soon afterwards, an envoy from the Academy of Magic arrives at Theo's castle, declaring that Yana was the real culprit for the tragedy of the big wedding. They want to execute her, but Saluka thinks something is wrong, as there hasn't been time for a full investigation. The envoy praises Theo for taking control of Sistina, and informs him that the Academy of Magic recognizes him as a new lord. As a reward, he also receives generous benefits for capturing the Black Witch. After that, Yana's execution is prepared. She is tied to a stake and the guards set her on fire, but she just laughed, shouting that everyone used her and discarded her when they didn't need her anymore. She declares that she won't die so easily, and sacrifices her own life to summon the Demon Lord. Chaos begins to form around her, and soon the Demon Lord, responsible for the tragedy of the Great Wedding, appeared. Yana laughs at everyone, saying that they are doomed, but to everyone's surprise, the demon knocks her down. Everyone is shocked, and meanwhile Saluka notices the Academy envoy smiling as he watches the witch die. Soon afterwards, the Demon Lord disappears and the energy around him dissipates. Meanwhile, on the mainland, Mirza receives the news that Tell has become the recognized Lord of Sistina. Mirza initially shows no interest, but the magician who informs him says that Tell is very popular with the people, and that his success could strengthen the rebellion of the independent noble. The magician is interrupted by a soldier, who rushes in to inform Mirza that some nobles have attacked one of his fortresses. Furious, Mirza discovers that the fortress has been destroyed by an army made up mainly of commoners. The wizard says that this is no longer a revolt, but a war, and that they must put an end to it quickly. The Mirza, still confused as to why the civilians are rebelling, accepts the wizard's suggestion to first attack the White Witch villages, then the werewolves, and finally the independent nobles who are leading the rebellion. He carries out his plan, setting fire to the witch village. He forces the werewolves to flee and defeats the nobles, and confident that no one can stand up to him now, Mirza ignores the wizard's warnings about Tell, who may well turn the tide against them. As they talk, Tell is already returning to the continent, and Saluka discovers the atrocities committed by Mirza against the people, and warns that he will be the most difficult enemy to defeat, and Tell replies that defeating him is crucial for their future. He meets up with Lask and other allies, who congratulate him on having conquered Sistina. Lask recognizes Tell's importance and points out that there is still time for him to become the leader of his forces. During the meeting of the treaty members, Tell asks for a minute's silence for the lives lost due to Mirza. Afterward, he accepts responsibility for the deaths that occurred while he was in Sistina, and volunteers to face Mirza in battle and defeat him. Tell says he can't do it alone, and asks the nobles to let him lead them this time. He asks the village's younger brother for approval, and he gives it. With that, Lask declares Tell his leader for the next battle. Meanwhile, Lady Marini receives some people for a cup of tea. Mirza praises her for having conquered the territories, after which they get into a discussion about the correct way way to govern the rebellious people, and Marini tells everyone to follow her methods in their own territory. Soon after, she explains the current status of her conquest, saying that she has a great chance of defeating the Union once and for all, but is still worried about Tel's return. Everyone knows that Tel intends to come after them, and they plan to deal with him when he does, and Marini warns them not to underestimate Tel and offers her help if necessary. Just then, a subordinate arrives and informs them that Tel has declared that he will retake the Dark Forest first. Mirza is furious to hear this and sets out to confront him. Marini once again warns him not to take his opponent too lightly. On the other hand, Tel has met with the werewolves and witches to discuss his strategy. He wants to fight Mirza in the dense forest because of the home advantage, and Saluka comments that the hard part will come later, when they need to conquer the castle. She says that they need a large number of soldiers for this, and that Lask is working to achieve this, and Josel is also with them, and informs them about the rebellion in the regions led by Mirza and the Viking princess. He has heard of a slave revolt there, and wants to ask for their cooperation. Tel allows it and gets to work preparing for battle. Meanwhile, Mirza is furious that the forest region has been taken away from him, and decides to invade it immediately. His mage asks him not to be so hasty, and to wait for Tel to leave the forest, as fighting him in the forest would be a big mistake. But Mirza doesn't like the fact that his wizard is acting like a fearful man, and silences him before ordering his army to assemble, for he is going to conquer the forest again. He is determined to defeat Tel and make him regret fighting with him. War soon breaks out in the forest, and the werewolves take advantage of the thick fog to ambush the enemy soldiers and defeat them one by one. The white witches also attack the enemies with the poisonous mist, killing many of them at once. Tel's army also confronts the enemies, but when Mirza appears, the captain orders the soldiers to retreat. He loses his eye and then his life trying to confront Mirza, but his soldiers escape safely into the forest. Mirza decides not to pursue them and heads straight for Tel's castle, but thorny vines obstruct his path and separate him from his army. Despite this, he continues to advance and soon arrives at the castle with just a few of his soldiers. He challenges Tel to a duel, but he tells him to accept defeat and return home. Mirza curses him, but he leaves anyway, and Saluka thinks he'll come back harder next time. And that really is about to happen, as Mirza still hasn't recovered from his big defeat. His sorcerer says that Tel will come out of the forest soon and attack him, and Mirza says he'll kill him right then and there. The wizard suggests that he send his army south to fight Lassik for a while, as this will cause Tel to appear and then they can fight him. Mirza likes the idea and tells him to start preparing for it immediately. Saluka receives a message that Mirza's army is heading south to fight Lassik and tells Tel that it's a trap. Saluka believes that for the time being they should continue in the same vein and gathers an army of civilians to fight. However, Tel doesn't like the idea of asking civilians to fight for him. Saluka confronts him, saying that people are more than willing to die for him, and this cheers him up. Tel declares that they will head for Mirza's castle in full force and take it while he is away. Saluka contacts her fellow mages and informs them of their plan, before asking them to buy time to capture the castle. The villar's younger brother mage has a plan, and asks Saluka to leave everything to him. When Mirza is heading south, he receives the news that the villager's younger brother has abandoned his castle and even left his wizard behind. He believes this has happened because the nobles have not yet accepted Tel as a reliable ally, and he wants to take the castle before dealing with Lassik. He tells his wizard to conquer the castle as quickly as possible and leaves part of his army to protect. Afterwards, as he continues his journey, Mirza discovers that Tel has deceived him and gathers a large army to confront him. He is furious and eager to defeat him, but his magician advises him not to, as they are much more numerous. Mirza is very angry at having to flee again, and even points his dagger at his magician, but Duffin ends up accepting his advice and retreats to his castle. There, he waits for his allies to arrive to help him fight Tel's army, but he discovers that the Marines are arriving to help them with only 3,000 soldiers, and that they have no news of the Vikings. Seeing the temporary fortress and the vast army in front of him, Mirza feels that this could be the moment when he finally tastes defeat, but he's not ready to go down without a fight. However, the bad news continues to pile up in front of him, and Lassik also arrives at the castle with his army. Mirza decides he can't wait for the Marine to arrive, and goes off to fight his enemies. His sorcerer begs him to stop, saying that it would be practically suicide to fight the vast army alone. Mirza this time time refuses his advice, saying that he can't let Marine get involved in this war, because if she loses too, the Alliance forces will be doomed. He thanks the wizard for helping him in his previous battles, and says that Tell is a true visionary who has realized that true power lies in the hands of the people. However, Mirza is not yet ready to accept this, and declares that he will fight for his ideals to the death, and his mage decides to follow him. He arrives with his army, and Tell receives the signal that the battle is about to begin. Mirza ignores the temporary fortress in front of him, and heads straight for Tell's base. Half of Mirza's army passes through the fortress, and a captain on Tell's side closes the gate and engages the remaining soldiers in battle. Mirza is furious, but still leads his remaining soldiers and passes through the enemy line. He is about to collide with Lassik's army, but decides to change direction at the last moment to attack Tell. Lassik is not happy about this and decides to pursue Mirza. Meanwhile, Mirza's army is fast approaching Tell, who decides to send the civilians away from the battlefield because he doesn't want them to die. He tells everyone to leave because they are no match for Mirza's army, but the civilians don't want to do that. They want to take revenge on the man who killed so many of them, and they ask Tell to give them his protection and take them into battle. He is moved by their determination and creates his giant flag to grant the soldiers his protection. Soon, Mirza crosses the fence that is in his way and makes his way to Tell. His soldiers follow him, but are forced to echo him by the rain of arrows coming their way. Mirza continues to deflect the arrows while looking for Tell, but Saluka forces him to stop by striking him with lightning. Immediately afterwards, Ishela leaps at him with a powerful blow, and Mirza somehow blocks it. The werewolf twins then attack him, but he manages to fend off the Ishela and defeat the twins with a single attack. Then it's Evan's turn to try to assassinate him silently, but Mirza interrupts his attack and makes him roll on the floor, and while he was distracted by this, Saluka uses a giant fireball to kill him, but Mirza somehow survives Saluka's attack. He attacks her, but Tell arrives to save his girl at the last moment. Mirza challenges him to a one-on-one fight, and Tell accepts the challenge, much to the horror of Saluka and her allies. She tells him that he can't take part in such a duel, as he carries the future of the continent on his shoulders. She's worried that he might die, but when he replies that he can't walk away from this fight, she at least asks him to win. Tell hugs her and asks her to trust him, then heads towards Mirza. They both enchant their weapons using their coats of arms, and the whole battlefield stops to watch if the leaders fight. Mirza attacks him first, and Tell follows his strategy of first blocking attacks and then counterattacking at the right moment. Mirza dodges his attack and tries to land a fatal blow, but Tell blocks it using his shield. Mirza continues to attack him, and Tell receives a few small cuts. While continuing to block all the attacks, Mirza keeps swearing at him as they fight, and he soon runs out of steam. Tell tells him that he has become much weaker since the last time they fought, and comments that he already seems to be at his limit. The Mirza is furious to hear this, and attacks him recklessly, further depleting his stamina. He loses his balance after a few blows, and Tell points out that his army has already surrendered, but Mirza refuses to die so easily and attacks Tell again, who manages to disarm him and bring him to his knees. Tell approaches him and asks him to hand over his coat of arms, but Mirza chooses to die. Tell then stabs him in the chest and finishes him off. Mirza's wizard can't bear the fact that his master is dead, so he kills himself to follow in his footsteps. After that, Mirza's crest shatters and turns into a sphere of chaos energy, and with the approval of his allies, Tell absorbs it and his crest evolves. Tell declares that they have succeeded in avenging the village's death, and holds a moment of silence for their former leader. Saluka runs up to him and hugs him, expressing how relieved she is that he has won. She asks him never to do that again, and Tell assures her that he won't, because there's no one he wants to defeat personally right now. With that, the clouds above them disperse, and Tell gets busy celebrating the victory with his allies. Meanwhile, Marine receives the news that Mirza died heroically while fighting Tell. She is upset at having lost her strongest ally, and furiously demands to know why he couldn't wait for them. The Marine's mage tells her that Mirza realized it was useless to wait for reinforcements, and that he didn't want the Marine to be in danger. She accepts her defeat in this battle, and decides to return to her territory immediately. city, before Tell and his allies attack her. On the other hand, Tell and his allies arrive at the castle they took from Mirza, and pay their respects to Viller. Afterwards, Lask kneels in front of Tell and offers to become his subordinate again, handing him his coat of arms. Tell asks the nobles if there are any objections, but they have all accepted him as their leader, and one queen even offers to become his subordinate too. Even Viller's brother wants to become Tell's subordinate, which surprises everyone. Tell happily accepts everyone's proposal, and Saluka declares him the official leader of the treaty, and everyone applauds as he takes the throne. Tell then declares that he will strive to carry on Viller's legacy, and ensure that eternal peace comes to the continent. They announce that they will maintain a neutral position, and split from the Union to reconcile with the Alliance. Lask and the others don't think this is a wise idea, as it could lead to an imbalance of power, as the Union becomes too weak and the Alliance gains an advantage. Tell replies that they still support the Union, while trying to end the battle with the Alliance to create a good balance. He declares that their future depends on the Union now, and that they need to get everyone to cooperate. Tell then announces that they can leave all that uncomfortable stuff until tomorrow, because today is the day to celebrate victory. He throws the liveliest party anyone has seen in years, and everyone enjoys themselves. When the party is over, it's late at night and Asaluka goes to her room to find Tell waiting for her. Tell wants to talk about something important and invites her to his room. She serves him tea and congratulates him on becoming the leader of the treaty. She claims that all the nobles have accepted him as their leader and that the people respect him more than ever. Suddenly, Tell suffers from imposter syndrome and feels unworthy of the love and respect he received. He even blames himself for the deaths of thousands of soldiers and civilians, and vows to ensure that such tragedies are never repeated. Tell declares that his ultimate goal remains the same, namely to return to his homeland and rule it peacefully. However, there is a slight change in plans, as he now wants Asaluka to stay with him too. She replies that she has forged eternal loyalty to him and will serve him all her life, and Tell realizes that he is failing to convince her. He hugs her and says that he wants her by his side, not as his hired assistant, but as his wife. Asaluka is moved and begins to cry as she accepts the proposal. She says that they must keep their relationship secret until everything is resolved, and then hugs him, asking him not to die in their next battles. Tell and Asaluka then visit Priscilla, who tells them that the Pope has declared that he is the owner of the Holy Degree. Asaluka believes that Priscilla is the true owner of the Holy Grail, as this is the shape of her coat of arms. Priscilla affirms this, and Tell asks the girls to explain what the Holy Degree is. Asaluka explains that the Church claims that if all the coats of arms in the world are united with the Holy Degree, they will be able to invoke a god who will destroy chaos once and for all, which is basically the same thing as the Emperor's coat of arms. Asaluka believes that since Priscilla is the true owner of the Holy Degree, the Pope who doesn't have that power might try to attack her, and she also warns Tell, because the Pope might come after her coat of arms too. Tell replies that if he can save the world by giving up his coat of arms, he will gladly do so. And later that day, they receive the news that Willer's best friend and one of the Union's strongest nobles has died in the war with Amarilli. Asaluka has received information that the new Union leader, called Downson, betrayed him and sabotaged his army before switching sides to the Alliance. She claims that the traitor is trying to rally the Alliance nobles to his side, but has not yet succeeded in doing so. Tell is upset to hear this, and fears that the Union is about to be destroyed right now. Asaluka tells him that she has an idea that could change things, and says that they should go and talk to Alexis. Tell doubts that they will be welcome after leaving the Union, but Asaluka trusts Alexis and says that he will probably be willing to talk to them. They then take a ship and arrive in Alexis' territory. Tell spots gigantic warships in the harbor, and Asaluka tells him that these ships are so slow that they are useless in a war, which is why they are called peace ships. While they're admiring the ships, Irving arrives to say that Alexis wants to meet them immediately. They go into a bizarre room, and Alexis fortunately remains the same person who charms everyone around him. He says he's delighted with Tell's recent achievements, but he's disappointed that Tell Tell and his allies have split from the Union and calls for their return, even offering the position of Union leader. Tell refuses because he wants to mediate between the Union and the Alliance, but Alexis doesn't think they'll ever be able to get along again. Alexis believes that if Tell hadn't been so adamant about peaceful negotiations with the Alliance, they wouldn't have lost Viller and the other nobles. Tell consoles him, saying that if he had decided to go to war, he would have lost Marine. Alexis laments, saying that Marine is still the most important person to him, and that's why he tried to achieve peace, but Marine was different from him, and instead she went to war against him. Saluka tells him that Marine only wants to create the Emperor's coat of arms by conquering the continent, and Alexis comments that they could form that coat of arms if they simply got married, and Saluka replies that there are people who don't want them to get married, and that they are behind the great tragedy of the wedding. Tell declares that he wants to undo the tragedy and restore the world to the time when the Alliance and the Union were about to become one. Alexis thinks this is impossible now, and Saluka confronts him, saying that they just need to find a balance between the Union, the Alliance, and the treaty to make it happen. She tells Alexis that most of the Union nobles haven't seen war yet, so their armies are still fully intact, while the Alliance armies under Marine's command have suffered heavy losses. She asks him to stand up and turn the tables on them, but Alexis is a coward who doesn't have the courage to do that. Tell says he must do it to save Marine, who still loves him. He believes that even if she conquers the continent and creates the Emperor's coat of arms, she will never be able to achieve happiness without the man she loves. Alexis can't believe that Marine still loves him, and Tell assures him that she does. He asks Alexis to remember how he and Marine promised to marry each other. Suddenly, Alexis becomes a real man, picks up his sword and marches off. Everyone is shocked to see the boy with a gun, and he tells his mage that he is about to attack the traitor, Dwenson. The mage doesn't believe him, but orders the army to be assembled immediately. When the news that Alexis is going into action reaches the soldiers, they are really eager to get into the fight. Meanwhile, Dwenson is enjoying his life after joining the Alliance, and thinks that no one can beat him now. He claims that the Union is full of idiots and weaklings, when suddenly a soldier bursts into his room to tell him that Alexis is leading a gigantic army towards their castle. He gets the biggest fright of his life when he looks out of the window and sees the army almost at his door. And it's not just Alexis, but all the nobles of the Union have allied themselves and come to deal with the traitor. At the sight of such a large army, the man shits his pants and contacts the Marina to save him, but she gives the excuse that her army is busy fighting the treaty and can't afford to come to his aid. Instead, she asks him to show his worth and defeat his enemies single-handedly in order to be accepted by the other members of the Alliance. The man realizes that he's fallen into a hole and sends his magician to ask Alexis to take him back to the Union. However, Alexis refuses to let the rat go and declares that if Dwenson gives him his coat of arms and his land, he will let him lie. He is furious when he receives the message and decides to go to war against the Union forces. He motivates his army and the mercenaries who work for him, promising them great rewards if they win. When Alexis sees Dwenson's army advancing towards him, he sighs because he still wants things to end without bloodshed, but unfortunately that's not possible. He then swings his coat of arms to protect his troop. While sending them into battle, he orders the cavalry to surround the enemy troop and press them so that the archers can hit them easily. His strategy of encircling and finishing off his enemies is super effective. When Dwenson looks at the battlefield, he realizes the overwhelming strength of Alexis' army and finally accepts defeat. Soon the news of his defeat reaches Marine, and she doesn't mind. She asks who was leading the Union forces and is speechless when she hears that it was Alexis who led his army with great talent. The Marine can't believe he's joined the battle and orders her allies not to underestimate him just because he doesn't look like a fighter. She rushes to her room and throws herself on the bed, wondering why Alexis had to join the battlefield. She's worried and doesn't want him to be dragged into the bloody war that's about to break out. Soon after, Alexis leads the Marine to fight the Viking, who are part of the Alliance. He takes the giant, slow ships with him, which are ironclad, and as soon as he spots the enemy, he orders his men to stop and get into a circular formation. The Viking king orders his men to run towards Alexis at full speed. He notices the strange formation and decides to surround the enemy fleet and attack from all directions. He uses his coat of arms and gives his blessing to his soldiers, causing them to become furious. Alexis orders his men to get into smaller boats and wait for the Vikings to approach. And just as the Vikings begin to disperse, he gives the order to advance and grants his protection to his soldiers. The soldiers in their boats fire arrows at the furious Vikings and don't stop even after being hit by them. Alexis then commands his gigantic warship to begin the attack. While his attacks sink his enemies, some Vikings manage to get close and try to climb on top of him, but the soldiers stab them and send them back into the sea, and the battle goes on like this. By nightfall, the Vikings have lost half their ships, while Alexis has yet to suffer any losses. The king of the Vikings is furious that he is about to be defeated, and although his generals advise him to retreat, he declares that he will fight like a man and die on the battlefield, and uses all the power of his coat of arms to enter beast mode along with the rest of his soldiers. He advances towards Alexis and boards one of its ships, killing all the soldiers on it. Ordinary soldiers are no match for him and his furious Vikings, and the king soon heads to the main ship to confront Alexis. The archers surround him and attack him from all sides. He fights back, ignoring all the damage he's taken, and continues walking towards Alexis while slashing at the soldiers. But then they hit him with a huge harpoon, causing critical damage. But even that isn't enough for this man's absolute defeat. He takes the harpoon out of his chest and walks towards his enemy. Now all the soldiers are terrified to attack him, and Alexis begins to cry at the sight of his pitiful state. The soldiers surround him and attack the Viking king again, but he simply pushes them aside. The mage with Alexis finally gets close and throws poison knives at the Viking to incapacitate him, and seizing this chance, a soldier beheads the king, but he keeps walking forward until he finally falls, and the blood that gushes from his body floods the ship. And Alexis goes weak at the knees at the horrible sight, and his sorcerers support him as the king's coat of arms shatters and all his chaotic energy begins to accumulate. He steps forward and gathers it inside him. Soon afterwards, Seleuca visits Marini to tell her that after the defeat of the Viking king, the three forces, the alliance, the union, and the treaty are on an equal footing. She wants to create a truce between the alliance and the union, but Marini refuses her offer. She claims that the alliance is still stronger and that she is ready to take on everyone in her own way. Seleuca accepts her decision, but still warns that fighting each other is not a wise thing to do, because that's what the real enemy wants. Marini asks what she's talking about, and Seleuca tells her that the Academy of Magicians is probably the root of all evil. She has no proof, but believes that it was they who summoned the demon in the tragedy of the Great Wedding. Marini says that they will find out the truth after the battle is over, and when Seleuca starts to leave, she asks what they said to Alexis to get him to join the battle. Seleuca replies that Alexis wants to stop her from following the path of violence, because it will only hurt her in the end. Marini gets angry when she hears this, and declares that she won't stop after making so many sacrifices. And Seleuca replies that both Tell and Alexis are ready to stop her, and also to accept her apology and a future alliance. However, Marini doesn't want peace, and orders everyone to unite in an all-out war against the treaty and the union. When she leaves, she begins to tremble with fear, anticipating the terrible war to come. Even so, she is determined to see these things through to the end.